Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. This is Jacked or KJ here. I work on the product marketing team at SafeBreach. I wanted to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to attend our interactive session today. Before we get started, I wanted to share a couple of housekeeping items and remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with all the attendees and the registrants after the webinar is complete in a day. At any given point of time, if you have any questions about the content or the SafeBreach product or anything that was shared today, or you have just general additional questions, please send them to us via the Q&A function. We shall be answering all the questions that we receive live during the Q&A session towards the end. So please please keep sending questions. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. As you know, every enterprise security operations center, or SOC, seeks the ability to run real-world attack scenarios that actually matter to their organization. But these typical red teaming exercises or penetration testing exercises can be very resource intensive. They can be expensive, and at times, a majority of the times, can be very difficult to operationalize. Today's webinar essentially will be focusing on 5 recommendations for building a scalable red team capability within your enterprise SOC, and how our newly announced SafeBreach Studio capability can help you achieve that. Today's speaker is SafeBreach's Chief Product Officer, Yotam Ben Ezra. Yotam has a very distinguished cybersecurity career. He's held several product leadership as well as research leadership roles over his entire career, most recently at Radware and at Checkpoint. Yotam holds a BSc degree in physics and computer science from King's College London, and he's been SafeBreach now with SafeBreach now for close to 4 years. Is that correct, Yotam?
Yeah, almost getting there.
All right, over to you, Yotam.
Right, KJ, thanks, and thanks for taking the time, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you and talk about red team activities. But taking a step back, our story starts with a CISO and a red teamer. That's how the story starts. And the CISO was at the company which was entering a hyper-growth stage and was essentially looking for a way to understand and strategize around how he's going to address that hyper-growth, with new architectures being introduced and new data centers and activities being introduced into the business at a very rapid pace. The red teamer, on the other hand, was at the time, after doing many years as an offensive security researcher, was doing consulting and was searching for a way to scale up his consulting from a red team operations perspective. And somehow these two guys met. They figured out that they need to connect together in order to solve this problem for the larger security community. And they are the founders of SafeBreach, of course, Guy Bejarano and Itzik Kotler. And I think today we are basically reaching the next step in this vision. A few years later, so SafeBreach was founded already a few years ago, and a few years later we are working with some of the largest organizations in the world, and basically helping them answer several questions, which essentially start from the business. So what is the level of the risk in the organization? What is the level of protection? How are we prepared against threats? Which all of those questions essentially are there to help the various levels in the organization do their job, right? So we've been working with various teams in the security organization. So from the CISO level, on the strategizing around budget, strategizing around reporting of security programs, and the overall focus of the business, and making sure that things are going in the right direction, through to security operations, which are interested in basically identifying the gaps and utilizing and validating their security controls. And then also with many of the red teams, which are essentially looking to make an impact on the organization and expose things which are specific and important to the business. And so, talking to a lot of the red teams out there, there is sort of a conflicting situation. In one end, people do understand and believe that red team exercises in a way which is pinpoint specific to the motivation of the organization and to how the organization is built, taking things really far, is supposed to make an impact in the organization and essentially help make security operations more effective. But at the same time, we hear over and over again that there are several challenges there which raise some questions in the ability to really scale, really make an impact, and really communicate whatever the red team is able to identify across the organization. And so let's talk about these questions for a minute. And those questions are worth asking when asking about what is the impact of our red team program. And so the first one, which we hear a lot, is, are we doing enough? Can I get the next slide, KJ, please? So next one, please. So the first one is are we doing enough? Are we testing enough threats in the organizations, and are we able to scale our operation to the point where we are really covering the right level of activity in the organization and really making a significant impact, which is wide enough to cover the size of the organization we operate in. The one before that is, are we testing the right threats? How do we make sure that the resources that we are investing in those deep red team exercises are actually the ones which are the most interesting for our organization and really have the impact that we are trying to create? The second one, the last two are around how do we socialize and how do we make those results actionable and effective. So are we drawing the right conclusions from the exercises? Are we able to turn those conclusions to the right consumers? So as we mentioned, there is an ecosystem today. There are many teams. Some of them are interested in the risk in the organization. Others might be interested in how they're investing their funds into different security controls. And others are interested in how they're operating the tools and how the tools are effective in addressing those threats. So are we drawing the right conclusions, and are we communicating them in the right terms such that they can actually be actionable for the organization? So in different ways, organizations we've been talking to have been asking us and themselves the same questions in different ways. And so we decided to come up with basically 5 principles, which are really going back to basics in terms how should we think about red team operation? How should we think about building our red team to an extent which will drive the right impact in the organization and also enable us to scale the operation to the extent that we want to. And so the first one is around defining our goals. And I think it's kind of going back to basics. Of course, you know, if you think about the different organizations out there, and so the disaster scenarios for different types of companies are entirely different. You'd be surprised, KJ, how many organizations are after the latest and greatest, rather than actually thinking about, you know, what is the actual disaster scenario for the organization, and then translating the vulnerabilities out there with their criticality into the actual disaster scenario. So if you think, for example, on a pharma organization or a health organization, that disaster scenario might be related to data versus manufacturing, which is related to business disruption, and the ability to map out the actual impact to the threat scenarios and the adversarial scenarios that we are going to focus on is key defining the threat scenarios for our red team exercises. It is key because once we communicate them across the rest of the organization, it will create the right impact as it relates to the business of the organization. And so back to basics, starting with defining the high-level goals, mapping out the different adversary and their goals and their motivations, and then deciding on the priority and the actual threat scenarios that we will cover. So that's number one. Let's go to number two. Number two is around communications. And so we talked about the different functions which are involved in consuming the data, and the different functions that are involved in either monitoring, reporting, or actually acting on the data. And if we have a good definition of the consumers in the organizations and their motivations, we will be able to define the deliverables in a way which is effective. And so obviously, when I'm trying to look from a high-level perspective into how the different business units in my organizations are doing, is very different than understanding what different configurations I need to change in order to change the situation or to identify the gaps. And I think one of the important things about it is the ability to link the two. So the ability to link the high-level view, the executive view, the high-level view of how risk distributes across the organization with what is the action that we need to take in order to reduce that risk. And so the consistency of communications across the different levels in the organization, from the story of the attack through the risk it represents, all the way down to the actionability of what we need to do, is extremely important. And the question is, okay, so how do we get there? And this is where we start with the how. And the how revolves around, first of all, applying a repeatable methodology, and basically not trying to invent the wheel every time we do the red team exercise, every quarter or every month, of course, as we scale. And that repeatable methodology includes 3 high-level stages. The first one is the ability to attack and attack in the same way each time. And so removing or reducing the bias across the way that we attack. And so once we define our threat scenarios, once we define our adversary goals, making sure that every time we repeat that process, we repeat it consistently. The next is the processing of results, the ability to basically understand what they mean, understand their priorities, and visualize them at the right level. And then lastly, the ability to deliver actionable results to stakeholders. That process must be repeatable and repeat itself in a cadence, which enables us to not only basically put the results out there and forget about it, but also make sure that we revalidate that things are actually moving in the right direction. And then we are able to communicate that across the organization. So that's the third recommendation. The fourth one is around how do we make that analysis and how do we make that data consistent and contextual across the organization. And here we realize that we are getting to an ecosystem which is pretty elaborate, right? We have a lot of security tools out there, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people managing those tools, and the ability to basically integrate with that ecosystem in a way which contextualizes the data and helps us understand in some cases what happened, in other cases what should have happened, is extremely important to the ability to streamline the process. So starting from the left, in the selection of the threats, if we already have a threat intelligence program in-house, the ability to consume the information from that threat intelligence program and align with the business goals of the organization as they are defined in that threat intelligence program, is the first stage in working hand in hand with the ecosystem. After that, and after the attacks have been run, the ability to basically enrich the data of the results with detection, prevention, log information, alerting information from our security ecosystem, vulnerability information from our vulnerability management systems, to basically provide a fully contextualized picture of how an attack would actually look like in the organization. And then we can basically drive analysis from the risk level all the way down to remediation, suggestions, data, and actions. And now we want to streamline the actionability or the actions that need to be taken into the workflow, the existing remediation workflow in the organization. Once we have that in place, the ability to scale is key. And so automation enables us to basically achieve several things. First of all, the coverage. So it means that once we've implemented a use case, a threat scenario, a risk scenario, we are able to iterate it automatically and go to the next one. And that scales our coverage in a way which is completely different. It also enables us to focus our skills where it matters. So focus the skills where with generating the attacks, thinking about the threats, thinking about the disaster scenarios for the organization, and thinking about how an attacker might do specifically for our organization. And so once we automate a lot of the manual activities which are around operation of the actual testing are taken away, and allows us to basically focus our skills where necessary. The next one is alignment. So the ability to align the organization across a repeatable, automated process, which basically increments itself in terms of the ability to add more and more disaster or threat scenarios for the organization, but continuing to monitor across the organization, both from a network perspective, but also from a time perspective. The different threat scenarios is something which is extremely important. And of course, we mentioned before consistency. So the ability to test the same thing every time is not trivial at all, but the automation really helps in getting there. So based on those principles, and based on the discussions and the questions that have been raised by red teamers across our time in the breach and attack simulation and security control validation space, we have decided to basically take our platform to the next level and enable those really specific and complex red team exercises in a platform which basically is built upon those principles that I just walked through. So on a coverage standpoint, first of all, it starts with the ability to access both threats, goals, and scenarios based on the thousands and thousands of attacks in the SafeBreach platform. And so the starting point is not from scratch, but from a library, a vast library of attacks. But it doesn't end there, because it is also integrated with your threat intelligence platform, and so it is able to consume both IOCs and TTPs from your threat intelligence platform and operationalize them. It can act as a starting point and then be customized, or it can be run as it is. It reduces the barrier for creating your own organization-specific and custom attacks in the platform. So it is fully customizable all the way from the attack code level, all the way up to the actual scenario and the threat level. It includes a no-code visual interface, which is a first-in-industry capability, which basically enables to do things which you would do using either Python or your language of choice, but enables you to do that using a graphical interface, hence making things easier both to understand but also to actually view. And it includes a programming language within that, programming logic, sorry, within that user interface. And so really helpful in both configuring, customizing, and creating your threat scenarios, but also in communicating them across the different team members. So talking about the alignments perspective, of course, this feeds into the SafeBreach platform, which is completely integrated with your ecosystem, and so generates those contextual results based on your customizable scenarios, pulling in data both from your security controls, from your security event management, from your vulnerability management to one unified location where you can either quantify these results and report your metrics across the executive levels, but also collect the technical data and the operational data and generate actionable reports for the operational levels. And of course, all of the visualizations which are included in the SafeBreach platform, whether it's the Miro heat maps or dashboards or raw results, are all basically streamlined into the SafeBreach Studio platform. From a consistency standpoint, of course, the remediation process can be streamlined into the existing workflow platforms, whether it's the SIEM platform, the SOAR platform, or the Jira. It's all integrated into the existing operational tools. So if we think about how Red Team can deliver results to the operational team and how they can impact and basically help streamline changes and basically drive change in the organization such that effectiveness is eventually impacted, is definitely streamlines the process. So from here, I think what I want to do is go into a short demo of the SafeBreach Studio on a specific scenario. And I'll share my screen where we start from the SafeBreach scenarios page. Of course, there are multiple scenarios here to choose from, which are curated by SafeBreach. I will start with a rather complex scenario because I want to get into some of the logic that is available. So we're looking at a lateral movement scenario with various methods. When I go to configure scenario, the SafeBreach Studio opens. I can see that this scenario has four different stages. The first two are around credential access and discovery, and the second two are the actual lateral movement remote command execution capabilities. And I already see that I have some logic implemented here. So the first lateral movement will act. If it's successful, it will move to the next one. If not, it will end the scenario. This is the logic that I've chosen here. Of course, I can configure it here. I can also configure, for example, some sleep capabilities. So if I want to do a more stealthy attack, I can define that the platform will basically sleep for some seconds or some minutes between the different steps, and hence test whether this is able to bypass different parts of the platform. I'm also able to control some of the execution flow. But let's make it a little bit more interesting. And let's say that I want to do something else. If in this case I'm harvesting credentials using Mimikatz, but if I wanted to add another method here to harvest credentials, all I have to do is pull in a new step in the attack. I can then select, that's in this case, I know what I'm looking for, so I'll select another credential harvesting tool, and I'll start defining the logic for this step specifically. So give it a name. Let's call it lasagna creds. This is the tool. And then start looking at connecting it to the next stage. Now, in this case, what I want to do is define that if the first step has failed, I'm going to try different methods for credential harvesting. So I go to the branching capability here, and I will say that if I got credentials, I'll give this the name. So if the credentials are actually there, then I will continue and use those credentials in the next steps. But if I didn't get them, then I want to go to this lasagna step and basically try the next method. I have to do a similar operation here. So if I don't have any credentials, I essentially can't continue to the next stages. So if the credentials are actually there, let's call this in the same way. I got the credentials. If not, I need to add a branch that ends that scenario, which means in this case, I'm going to finish. So now define the very simple logic of branching. If I was able to get the credentials, I will move on. I will discover hosts using SMB. I will then move on to remote command execution, which will also have some logic. So it will try the next one on some condition, will not try on other conditions. And this is a very simple example on how I can define different types of logic. Of course, I can add multiple attacks here. I have 3 of my attacks in my scenario, and I can basically edit very complex scenarios using this capability. Now, the question is now what? How do I run this? So all I have to do is add which simulators I want to run this on. In this case, I have some which are eligible and some which aren't. I select them. I get an indication that all of the steps here can run. And now I can run this as a test or save it as a plan and run it later. So I've already ran this and wanted to show also an example of how it would look on a dashboard. So in this case, I have my different phases. I can get an overall view of the attacks that I was testing, the different minor techniques that I was testing, the total number of simulations. In this case, I tried it on the 2 simulators here. And then I can break it down to the different stages. So I can see the Mimikatz was unsuccessful, it was blocked. So the scenario went to the next one and went to the lasagna. This was successful. Then went to the SMB discovery, was able to find some hosts there, and then tried the RDP, wasn't successful, and was eventually successful with W and my remote command execution. Of course, that any attack that I will try here look into will also show me the results in detail and with all the details of how this attack works, of course, with integrations to security control, security events, and the entire details. And so here we have an overall report, which gives me the high-level view, and then also the breakdown of the different phases. And I can share either the PDF of the report, or I can share the technical details, which are the underlying simulations behind this. So this was a quick overview of SafeBreach Studio and a quick demo of it. I hope this was enjoyable and useful for everyone. And thanks for listening. KJ, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Yotam. We are now, if you need additional information about the SafeBreach Studio, our first no-code red team platform capability, please take out your phone and you can scan this, or you could just go to our website under Solutions. You'll see SafeBreach Studio, and you're going to get additional details about the capability as well as multiple other resources that you can find helpful. If you need any specific questions answered, or you want to get a more detailed demo, please feel free to request a demo, and then we'll definitely get back to you right away. So now I want to open up the floor for any questions that you might have. Please.
Just a question, KJ, here that I want to address. So there is a question around, can the execution payloads be customized, and can we use custom builds of Mimikatz? The answer is yes. You can. You can definitely customize a SafeBreach attack, upload your own payload, and make it run. So that was one of the questions. Thanks for the question, and of course, happy to share more information on this.
Absolutely. And we've received another question is, we've seen that SafeBreach Studio you talked about executives being able to make better business decisions. Can you explain in a little more detail how a red teaming capability can help executives do that?
Yeah, so it goes back to the goals, right? So if we define our goals in a way which relates to the business of the organization and the disaster scenarios which are associated with things which are interesting to the business. So let's say we are a manufacturing company and our disaster scenarios actually simulate someone making the plant being unusable or disrupting operations or disrupting with production. Then the risk for those scenarios and the ability to communicate what it means from an attacker standpoint and what it means from a defense ecosystem standpoint, joining those two together can drive better investment decisions, can drive better budget justification, and if everything is great, then also can show ROI on the strategy that is already in place.
Thank you, Tom. Next question is, how does this capability compare to an automated red team or penetration testing platform?
Yeah, so I think generally what SafeBreach platform was able to do here was to connect two sides, right? To connect the side of going very deep on red team exercise, on attack capabilities, but also enable the integration with the ecosystem and contextualizing the results in a way which is kind of unprecedented. So the ability on one hand to drive scenarios which are very specific to the organization, testing them, but on the other hand, correlating those results with the different aspects of the security ecosystem and communicating those across the organization in a way that relates to what people actually do is something which is unique.
Thank you. Another question that we have here is, how many different kinds of attacks can be run simultaneously?
So what we see from our customers that when you actually scale up, you end up running millions and hundreds of thousands is pretty common, and millions of attacks per month is something that our customers do. So basically the numbers there are very high as you scale up the platform.
Those are about the questions that we've received from the audience. Again, if you have any additional questions, please send them via Q&A. And if you, I did get another question right here, is do you provide professional services that can assist in the customization of attack workflows? Also, are there releases of SafeBreach defined attack workflows that address late breaking issues such as Log4j?
Yeah, so yes, we do provide professional services. SafeBreach as a service. We have a full service, professional services solution architect team, which basically enables not only customization of attack, selection of scenarios, but also derivation of dashboards, reporting, basically end to end. So from the definition of the goals through the process of the definition of who is going to consume the data, running the scenarios together with customers, and then also looking at the results and creating the dashboards in order to support the various levels of reporting around them. So that was the first part of the question. The second part was, do we support the latest threats, I think, and the answer is yes by SLA. So we support an SLA of 24 hours for US cert alerts, and we've been true to that SLA for the last, I think, 3-4 years at least in my time here. So for example, there was a US cert alert last weekend on exploitations of Log4j on VMware systems, and we supported that within a few hours. It was, I think, already on Friday on the platform. So since our playbook doesn't require any action on the customer side from consuming new attack perspective, it is simply there as soon as our research releases it.
Thank you. Another question we have is, how does the platform assist with remediation actions from successful attack simulation?
Sure. So what we've realized is that I think I just mentioned it a couple of questions ago. So when you are successfully scaling the platform, you are running hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of attacks per month. So what we don't want to do is have you analyze one by one the results, right? So what we have is an analytics layer which runs on top of the results and basically aggregates remediation recommendation which are relevant to multiple simulations. So basically we scale down the problem from hundreds of thousands to a few. Those can then be prioritized by the attack surface they represent, and then also they include actual technical data packages which you can either import to your controls directly or to your SIEM platform for detection purposes. So this capability is called SafeBreach Insights, and it also further integrates with workflow platforms such as Cortex XSOAR and others, Splunk and others. So this is pretty much the Insights capability.
Those are about the questions that we've received. Again, thank you everyone for taking the time to attend this webinar. And we hope you really enjoyed it. Please be on the lookout for a follow-up email with a link to the recording. Again, if you have any other questions specific to pricing, please feel free to reach out to us via our website. We will be more than happy to talk to you about this. In terms of the pricing, I just want to make one specific note that this capability is included inside the SafeBreach platform, so it doesn't come at an extra charge. So if you are a SafeBreach customer, you can very well avail of this capability without paying any extra additional price. So again, thank you everyone for taking the time to attend our session today. And we wish you a very best rest of the day and rest of the week. Thank you again.
Thanks, KJ. Thanks everyone for your time. Pleasure to be here.